Tristan Blackwood sat alone at the VIP table in the darkest corner of the ballroom, the whiskey in front of him untouched for the entire hour. Around him, his younger brother's engagement party swelled with laughter and conversation, with champagne glasses clinking, soft jazz drifting through the air, and Connor dancing with Felicity in the middle of the floor. Tristan felt like darkness condensed into a man, seated in a sea of light that didn't belong to him. 4 years. 4 years since the night Meredith died in his arms, and he still couldn't sit through any party without smelling blood, without hearing her whisper, "I love you," just before her eyes closed forever. The scar along his jaw pulsed, the only physical reminder left from that fateful night, besides the pain. He should leave. No one would dare say a word if he walked out early. He was Tristan Blackwood, the silent architect of a city built on shadows and secrets. He'd done enough. He'd shown up, congratulated his brother, signed the wedding gift check. Connor would understand. Connor always understood. His hand had just brushed his phone to call his driver when a voice rose up, small, serious, and utterly unafraid. "Are you a bad man?" Tristan went still. He lifted his head. 3 little girls, identical as reflections, stood in front of his table, about 6 years old, with brown curls and clear green eyes. They wore simple white dresses, not fancy party dresses, but the kind that had been worn many times, a little short for their height, with shoes scuffed at the edges but scrubbed clean, and they were looking at him with an intensity adults rarely dared to aim at him. "Why do you ask?" Tristan said, his voice colder than he'd meant it to be. Molly, the smallest one with the big eyes, tilted her head, studying him like she was analyzing data. "Because you look very scary," she said bluntly. "But our mom says you should never judge people by how they look. Bad people sometimes look good. Good people sometimes look bad." "I look bad?" Tristan repeated, one corner of his mouth lifting slightly, something that had almost never happened in the last 4 years. The girl in the middle shook her head. "You look sad. Sad people often look scary." The girl on the right, the smallest one with the biggest eyes, took one more step closer, without a trace of hesitation. "Like our mom," she said softly. "Mom's sad too, but she's not scary. She's just tired." Something in Tristan's chest cracked open, something he'd thought had died a long time ago. The 3 girls traded glances, that wordless, telepathic kind of communication that triplets seemed to have. Then, with perfect synchronization, all 3 leaned in close enough for Tristan to catch the faint scent of cheap shampoo. Their voices dropped into an urgent whisper. "Can you help our mom?" Tristan blinked. "Help with what? Someone's making our mom cry?" The girl on the left, the one Tristan guessed was the oldest, explained quickly. "The manager. He's yelling in mom's face. In front of everybody. Our mom's a server here," the girl in the middle added. "She didn't do anything wrong. She just spilled 1 drop of sauce." "But he's yelling really loud," the girl on the right said, her eyes suddenly shimmering with tears. "Our mom never cries in front of us, but I saw her eyes were red when she came out of the bathroom. She cried alone. Mom always cries alone." Tristan felt that familiar rage flare, the only emotion he still allowed himself to keep. But this time it wasn't about business. It was for the 3 children standing in front of him with eyes too old for their age. "Why come to me?" he asked. "There are hundreds of people here. Why not ask someone else?" The girls looked at one another, and then the one on the right, the one who seemed closest to tears, answered in a trembling but certain voice. "Because you look like someone who can make anybody scared. But you don't scare us." The girl on the left nodded, finishing her sister's thought. "So you must be a good man pretending to be a bad one." The girl in the middle concluded, calm as a judge. "Our mom needs a good man, but she also needs a scary one. You're both." Tristan couldn't speak. No one, not a single person, had ever seen through him like that. Not 3 6-year-old girls in scuffed shoes and old dresses. "Where's your mom?" he heard himself ask. All 3 girls lifted their hands at once, pointing toward the kitchen doors. Tristan followed their gesture. Near the staff entrance, a woman stood, with her head slightly bowed, while a heavy man, his face flushed red, jabbed a finger at her and shouted. She wore a black and white server uniform, chestnut brown hair pulled up neatly, and she was thin, not fashionably thin, but thin in the way of someone who gave her food to her children. But she stood straight. Even as he yelled, even as he pointed at her in front of the crowd, she didn't cower, didn't tremble, didn't beg. She simply stood there, her hands clenched at her sides until her knuckles turned white, and she endured. Tristan recognized that posture instantly. The posture of someone who'd endured too much to still know how to fall. The posture of someone who would stand until their last breath, even if the world collapsed around them. She looked exactly like he had looked for 4 years. "That's our mom," the girl on the left whispered. "Her name's Bryn Mitchell. Mom works 3 jobs to take care of us," the girl in the middle added, pride tangled with heartbreak. "She works here, at the grocery store, and cleans offices at night. She sleeps very little. And bad people want money from Mom," the girl on the right said, her voice shaking more now. "They come to our house. They pound on the door really hard. Mom tells us to hide in the closet whenever they come." Tristan went rigid. "Bad people?" he asked slowly, his voice turning a few degrees colder. "What are their names?" The girl on the left frowned, trying to remember. "Mom calls them Mr. Moretti's men." Moretti. The name hit Tristan like ice water thrown straight into his chest. Moretti. The man who had ordered Tristan's assassination 4 years ago. The man who had caused Meredith to die in his place. The man Tristan had sworn to erase, but had not yet found the right moment to do it. And now, his people were threatening a single mother and 3 little girls. "Last week," the girl on the right went on, her voice catching. "Last week they grabbed our mom's hair." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Tristan understood. The rage inside him was no longer a slow burn. It ignited. Cold, lethal, and perfectly controlled. This was the anger the Chicago underworld feared. But when he looked down at the 3 girls, he saw no fear at all. Only hope. The kind of hope no one had looked at him with in 4 years. "I'll help your mom," Tristan said as he stood. "Stay here. Don't go anywhere." "Really?" The girl on the left's eyes widened. You'll really help? You don't even know our mom." "I know enough," he said. He buttoned his suit jacket and adjusted the cuff of his shirt. Every movement was slow, deliberate, the ritual he performed before every important negotiation. The girl on the right suddenly took his hand, her palm tiny and warm. "You won't scare our mom, will you?" she asked, looking up at him. Tristan looked down into those clear green eyes far too pure for the harsh world she was living in. "I promise," he said. She nodded and let go. "Okay, I believe you." Tristan had taken only a few steps when the girl on the left called out again. "Sir, wait." He turned back. Molly, the smallest one with the big eyes, dug into the pocket of her dress and pulled something out. Several crumpled $1 bills and a small handful of coins. She stepped forward again, her tiny hands trembling as she counted, then held it out to him. "This is our money. $5.37. All our savings. Take it. To pay you." Tristan stared at the money in her palm. So little, so wrinkled, and yet everything those 3 children had. Something tightened in his throat. "Keep it," he said, his voice suddenly rough. "I don't take money from children." "But this is an order," he said, looking at all 3 of them. "And I don't joke about my orders." Then he turned away and walked toward the woman being shouted at, the walk of a man used to commanding, used to control, used to making others afraid. But this time, he wasn't walking to destroy. This time, he was walking to protect. And maybe, just maybe, he was walking toward the thing Meredith had always wanted him to find. "Live on," she had whispered before her eyes closed. For 4 years, he hadn't understood what that meant. But as he looked at the woman standing straight while being ground down, and thought of the 3 little girls behind him holding hands and waiting, Tristan began to understand. Living wasn't just breathing. Living was having someone worth protecting. Behind him, the 3 little girls whispered to one another. "Do you think he can help?" Molly asked anxiously. Ellie watched the man's back as he moved toward their mother. Tall, frightening, and yet, strangely, making her feel safe. "He can help," Ellie said with certainty. "He promised." "But how do you know he'll keep his promise?" Daisy asked. Ellie smiled, a smile older than her years. "Because he looked at Mom the way Mom looks at us. Like he just found something important." The 3 sisters held hands, watching, and on the other side of the ballroom, Tristan Blackwood, the man who held the city's fate in his silent, steady hands, was stepping into the life of a woman and 3 little girls he had never met. None of them knew that tonight would change everything. That sometimes, The loneliest people find each other in the strangest ways. That sometimes, even the devil can be redeemed. By 3 6-year-old girls, their life savings, and a promise. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit like to support the channel. Please share it with the people you love, because sometimes a story can change someone's whole day. And if you want to stay with stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single episode. Tristan walked, and with every step, it was as if the light around him was being drained away. The servers automatically slipped to either side without anyone needing to tell them, as though survival instinct alone warned them to stay clear of the path of a man radiating a chill, bone-deep killing intent. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to, because when Tristan Blackwood arrived, everything stopped to wait for him. Marco was still shouting, his shrill voice echoing through the corner of the hallway near the kitchen door. The heavy manager, face flushed red, was pointing a finger into the woman's face, spittle flying with each word. You think you're somebody who can spill sauce on a guest? Do you have any idea how important this party is? I'm docking your entire pay this month. No, 2 months. He didn't need to see her uniform again to know who she was. While Marco's voice grew shrill and ugly, Bryn remained a pillar of silent strength. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a warrior who had simply run out of battlefield, yet refused to surrender her dignity. What's the problem here? His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through every other sound like a razor-sharp blade. Marco whipped around, his mouth still open, ready to keep yelling, then froze in place. The red in his face drained to a sick white in an instant. Mr. Blackwood. Tristan didn't bother looking at him. His gaze stayed locked on Bryn, the woman who had now turned to face him, wary but not afraid. That surprised him. Most people were afraid of him on the first look. She works for me from now on, Tristan said, in a tone that accepted no argument. Marco stuttered. But sir, she's an employee of our restaurant. She. I didn't ask. Tristan finally looked at him, and that single glance was enough to make Marco swallow the rest of his sentence. Get out! The manager vanished so quickly it was almost like he left an afterimage behind. Tristan turned back to Bryn. She was still standing there, still not lowering her head, but now her eyes were on him with fierce concentration. Not fear, not gratitude, assessment. Are you hurt? The question made Bryn blink. Clearly it wasn't what she'd expected. No. Good. Tristan tipped his head slightly toward the VIP table, where the 3 little girls were sitting and waiting, waving like mad. Your daughters are waiting. Bryn followed his gaze, and for the first time, the hardness in her face softened. She moved quickly toward her children, and Tristan followed a step behind. The 3 little girls immediately hopped down from their chairs and ran to throw their arms around their mother. Mom, are you okay? Uncle Tristan helped you, didn't he? Bryn dropped to her knees, checking each child as if she were the one who needed protecting. I'm fine. Then she lifted her head and looked at Tristan, her eyes sharp. Who are you? Tristan Blackwood. She didn't react to the name. Either she didn't know it, or she didn't care. Both possibilities made Tristan curious. Why did you help me? Tristan pulled out a chair and sat down across from them. Because of Moretti. This time, Bryn reacted. She went still, her arms tightening around her daughters by the slightest degree. You know them. They killed my wife, Tristan said evenly, as if he were talking about the weather. 4 years ago. Bryn was silent for a long time, her eyes scanning his face, reading him. Then she spoke slowly. You're their enemy. The way you said that name, like you tasted something sour. Smart. Tristan nodded. How much do you owe them? Bryn hesitated, glancing at her daughters. The 3 girls sat very still now, wide-eyed, listening to everything. At last she let out a breath. $47,000. Your husband? He ran. When the girls were 8 months old, Bryn's voice held no emotion, as if she'd told the story too many times to still feel the ache. He gambled, borrowed money, and then disappeared. Left me with 3 children and a mountain of debt. 6 years. 6 years I paid off more than half. But interest breeds interest. Bryn gave a thin, bitter smile. Now they're giving me 30 days to pay it all. $47,000 in 30 days. Tristan looked at the 3 girls. 6-year-old children with eyes older than their age. Children who already knew how to hide in a closet when strangers pounded on the door. Children who had tried to hire a Mafia boss with $5.37. What did they say if you can't pay? Bryn didn't answer. She only looked at her daughters, and in that moment, Tristan saw the fear she'd been hiding for so long. Not fear for herself, fear for the 3 small lives sitting beside her. That look said enough. Tristan let the silence stretch for a few more seconds. Then he spoke with the calm of a man discussing an ordinary business deal. I'll pay that debt. Bryn lifted her head, green eyes meeting his without flinching. No, you haven't heard everything. I don't need to. Her voice was hard, final, without a single tremor of hesitation. I don't take charity, and I don't sell myself. Tristan leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. This isn't charity. I want Moretti to hurt. Every debtor they lose is a cut. You just happen to be the knife I can use. Bryn went quiet for a moment, her head tilting as if weighing him. Then she gave a small nod, brutally honest. I respect that. So you agree? No. She stood, pulling the 3 girls up with her. I don't want to owe the Mafia. Owing loan sharks is bad enough. I'm not stupid enough to trade one devil for another. Tristan wasn't angry, only surprised. It had been a long time since anyone had refused him, especially not that bluntly, and especially not when they were desperate. Bryn took her daughter's hands and turned to leave. She didn't run, didn't hurry like someone fleeing. She walked with her back straight, and her chin lifted, like a queen departing an audience chamber. Not a single mother drowning in debt. Dignity poured out of every step, and Tristan realized he was watching her with something close to admiration. He slipped his business card into her jacket pocket as she passed. The motion so quick and discreet, Bryn didn't notice at all. The 3 girls followed their mother, but Molly, the smallest one with the round, wide eyes, suddenly stopped. She glanced back at Tristan, then at her mother ahead, then back at Tristan again. A decision settled behind those child-bright eyes. Molly ran back and stopped in front of him. She pulled a few crumpled $1 bills and a small handful of coins from her dress pocket, counted fast, then pressed it all into his hand. I know Mom will say no, she whispered, her tone serious, like an adult negotiating the most important contract of her life. Mom always says no. She doesn't like asking anyone for help. Tristan looked down at the money in his palm. $5.37, all the savings of 3 children. Keep it, Molly went on, her eyes shining. So later, if Mom changes her mind, you'll still have a contract with us. We already hired you. You have to keep your word. Then she turned and ran after her mother and sisters, her white dress fluttering as she went. Tristan stood there alone, watching the 4 figures disappear through the ballroom doors. A woman who wasn't afraid of him, 3 little girls who had hired him with every cent they owned, and him, a king of the shadows now ruled by a child's small fortune, holding those crumpled bills as if they were the most valuable thing he'd ever been given. He'd never met anyone like them. Bryn's apartment sat on the 5th floor of an aging building where the elevator had been broken for 2 years, and no one had bothered to fix it. It was a single room that served as both living room and bedroom, with an old double bed where the 4 of them squeezed together every night. There wasn't much furniture, but everything was clean, and the walls were covered with the 3 girls' scribbled drawings, bright with color as if they were trying to make up for the room's grayness. At 11 o'clock at night, Bryn sat by the window, staring down at the pitch-black alley below. The 3 girls were asleep, curled together on the bed like 3 kittens, their breathing steady in dreams that didn't know what tomorrow might bring. In her hand was a black business card she'd found by accident in her pocket when she got home. Silver lettering. No name, only a string of phone numbers. She knew whose it was. $47,000 in 30 days. She worked 3 jobs, and still couldn't always cover the rent each month. She'd sold everything she could sell, skipped meals so her daughters could eat, worked herself to exhaustion every day, and it still wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, but she couldn't ask anyone. She'd made it through 6 years on her own. She would keep making it through on her own. The pounding at the door shattered the quiet. Not knocking, pounding. Hard, relentless, as if that thin door could be kicked in at any second. Mitchell, open the door. Bryn was on her feet before she even had time to think. She turned toward the bed, where the 3 girls were awake now, wide-eyed in the dark. She didn't need to say a word. One nod, one familiar look, and all 3 silently slid off the mattress and crawled into the old wardrobe in the corner. They'd done this before. They knew how to be silent, how to make themselves small, how to hold their breath. Bryn swallowed and stepped to the door, forcing it open. 2 men stood there, big, their faces cold as ice. She recognized one of them. He'd come a few times before, always with threats tucked behind a fake smile. But tonight there was no smile. "Boss told us to remind you," the first man said, his voice flat, like he was reading a sentence that had already been decided. 30 days. No exceptions. "I know," Bryn said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'll have the money." The second man stepped inside without asking permission. His gaze swept the tiny apartment, pausing on the empty bed, on the children's drawings on the wall, on the wardrobe door that sat cracked open by a narrow sliver. "Where are you going to get it?" He gave a short, contemptuous laugh. "You think we're stupid? You work 3 jobs and you still can't even cover the monthly interest." The first man moved in, grabbed Bryn by the collar, and slammed her back against the wall. Pain shot through her spine, sharp and immediate, but she didn't cry out. She couldn't, not in front of her children. "Boss says if there's no money," he whispered into her ear, his breath thick with cigarette smoke, "then we'll take something else instead." He turned his head and looked straight at the wardrobe. Bryn's heart stopped. She heard Molly hold her breath inside. She heard Ellie pull her sisters closer. She heard Daisy fighting back a sob. "I'll have the money," Bryn said, her voice ringing out, cold and hard as steel, even as she was breaking apart inside. "That's my problem. Now get out of my home." The 2 men looked at each other, then laughed. The sound filled the small room like a curse. Then they released her, walked out, and slammed the door behind them. Bryn stood there for 30 more seconds, waiting to be sure. Then she ran to the wardrobe, yanked it open, and pulled the 3 trembling girls into her arms. "Mom!" Molly cried, her voice choking. "Are they going to take us?" "Never." Bryn held them tighter, her voice cracking. "I promise. Never." But a promise wasn't enough. She knew that. A promise didn't pay a debt. A promise didn't stop men willing to do anything for money. She didn't know when the girls fell asleep again, exhausted by fear. Bryn sat in the dark with the black card in her hand, staring at the 3 peaceful faces on the bed. Ellie lay in the middle, both arms wrapped around her sisters as if even in sleep she was still protecting them. Daisy was curled like a cat. Molly held a worn old teddy bear tight, the only birthday gift she'd ever had. Tears fell. For the first time in 6 years, Bryn let herself cry. She had no right to pride. Not when her daughters' lives were being threatened. Not when those men had looked toward the wardrobe the way you looked at merchandise. 2 o'clock in the morning, her hand shaking. She dialed the number on the business card. 1 ring. 2 rings. Blackwood. His voice was awake, as if he hadn't been sleeping, or as if he'd been waiting for this call. Silence stretched. Then Bryn spoke, her voice raw with tears. "I hate you for being right." No explanation. No more words. He understood. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring your daughters." "Why do I have to bring them?" "Because from now on, nobody in your household goes anywhere without protection." The Blackwood Industries Tower rose in the heart of downtown Chicago, like a monument to power, all glass and steel, piercing the sky with a cold, frightening elegance. Bryn stood before the revolving doors, her hand clamped tight around the hands of her 3 little girls, forcing down the smallness swelling in her chest. She'd made her decision. There was no turning back. They stepped into the lobby, and Bryn knew instantly she'd entered a completely different world. The marble floors shone so brightly they could have been mirrors. Employees in expensive suits moved like silent ghosts, and all of them paused to look when they saw a woman in worn clothes walk in with 3 little girls at her side. A young man approached, surprise written plainly on his face. "Are you Mr. Tristan's guest?" His eyes flicked to the girls, then back to Bryn, then back to the girls again. "And there are children?" "She's my guest." Tristan's voice came from the elevator bank. He stepped out, still in the black suit from the night before, still with that unreadable, icy gaze. "Connor, take them up to my office." Connor, the young man, nodded, though he still looked stunned. Tristan's office sat on the top floor, as large as Bryn's entire apartment put together, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the whole city. The furnishings were minimal but expensive. Not a single personal photo, not one unnecessary decoration. Cold, empty, exactly like its owner. Tristan sat behind his desk and slid a stack of papers toward Bryn. "Your debt has been paid, since last night." Bryn froze. "You did it before I agreed?" "Moretti knew you were connected to me the moment I intervened at the party." Tristan's tone stayed calm, as if he were talking about the weather. "They weren't going to wait 30 days anymore. They'll move now." There wasn't time for you to think. Bryn wanted to be angry. She wanted to shout that he had no right to decide for her, that she wasn't a puppet for anyone to pull strings on. But then she looked down at the papers in her hands. $47,000, paid in full. 6 years of debt, 6 years of skipping meals, 6 years of fear every time someone knocked on the door, ended in a single night. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, from relief so sharp it nearly hurt. "What do I owe you?" she asked, her voice rough. "I don't know yet. I need to know." Tristan looked at her, his eyes deep and unreadable. "When I know, you'll know. But I promise it won't be something you can't give. A promise from a Mafia boss." Bryn didn't know whether to believe it. But what choice did she have now? A burst of giggles cut straight through the tension. Bryn turned and nearly choked. Her 3 daughters had taken over a corner of the office. Ellie was scribbling on expensive sticky notes she'd found on the desk. Daisy was sticking cat-shaped stickers all over somebody's black leather briefcase. And Molly, the youngest, was sitting in Tristan's leather swivel chair, spinning in delighted circles. "Do you have colored pencils?" Ellie asked Tristan as she looked up, completely unafraid. "No, this office needs more color," Daisy observed, still adding stickers. "It's too sad." Molly spun one more time. "This chair is so fun. Mom, let's buy one for home." Bryn opened her mouth to apologize, to pull her girls back, but then she noticed something. Tristan was watching them with a strange expression. Not annoyed, not angry, just confused, as if he didn't know how to react to this bright, chaotic invasion. Tristan's staff stood outside the door, eyes wide, but no one dared say a word. Bryn watched Tristan. The way he looked at her daughters was stiff and awkward, like a man who'd forgotten how to interact with children, or maybe a man who'd never known at all. But he didn't chase them away. He didn't bristle. He simply stood there and let 3 little girls turn the Mafia boss's office into a playground. He doesn't know how to love, Bryn thought, but he's trying. Tristan turned back to her, the cold edge returning to his gaze. "From now on, you're mine, and no one touches what's mine." Before she could turn to leave, Tristan reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a slender silver bracelet. He took her hand, his touch cold but firm, and clipped it onto her wrist. "Keep this on," he commanded. "It has a built-in GPS tracker. If you or the girls are ever in danger and I am not there, press the small button in the center. I will find you, no matter where you are." A week passed in a counterfeit kind of peace. Bryn slipped back into her usual routine, walking the girls to school, working the morning shift at the grocery store, the afternoon shift at the restaurant, and trying to believe that everything would be fine. The debt was paid. Moretti had no reason to come after her anymore. She told herself that every night before she fell asleep, like a desperate prayer. Then Tristan's phone buzzed. He was sitting in his office, staring out at the city through the massive pane of glass, when the message arrived. A photo. Bryn was leading the 3 girls across the street, right in front of the elementary school gate. The angle made it clear the photographer was sitting in a car, only a few yards away. Beneath it was a single line from Moretti. "She belonged to us first. You think paying makes it over?" Tristan didn't say a word. He didn't slam his desk. He didn't shout. He just sat there, looking at the photo, and the air in the room turned cold, as if someone had opened a freezer door. Connor stood nearby, watching his brother with worry. He knew that look. The quieter Tristan got, the calmer he seemed, the more terrifying he became. "Call her," Tristan said, his voice stripped of emotion. "Tell her to come to my office, right now." 20 minutes later, Bryn stood in front of him, her face tight with strain. "What is it?" Tristan slid the phone across the desk. Bryn looked at the photo, and the blood drained from her face in an instant. "You and your daughters are moving into my house," Tristan said, not as an offer, but as an order. "Today." "Absolutely not." Bryn shook her head, even though her voice trembled. "I can't live in a stranger's house. My girls need stability. They need a normal life. Moretti sent a photo of your daughters, taken from a car outside their school." Tristan stood, stepping closer. "They know your schedule. They know where your children go. They can touch them anytime they want." Bryn swallowed. "This isn't the life I want for them. Life or death? Choose." It was a brutal question. The answer was obvious. Bryn hated him for being right. She hated herself for having no choice. That afternoon, A black car took them away from the small apartment where they'd lived for 6 years, where there had been drawings on the walls and memories, some tender, some bitter. The 3 girls sat quietly in the back seat, wide-eyed, watching the city slide past the windows. The Blackwood estate lay in the suburbs of Chicago, past a long road that cut through an oak forest. A massive iron gate swung open automatically as the car approached, as if swallowing them into the belly of a beast. The mansion appeared after the final bend, and Bryn heard Molly suck in a sharp breath. Huge, luxurious, and cold enough to raise gooseflesh. The house was built from gray stone, with windows tall as the eyes of a giant staring down at them. Not a single flower in the garden, only a stretch of green lawn trimmed so perfectly it looked like a cemetery. No birdsong, no wind, only a heavy silence draped over everything. They stepped inside, and Bryn understood at once. This wasn't a home, it was a museum. Expensive furniture arranged with showroom precision, not a speck of dust, not a single object out of place. No family photos on the walls, no plants inside, nothing at all that suggested anyone truly lived here. "This house is so sad," Molly whispered, her small voice echoing in the vast entry hall. Daisy looked around, her hand gripping her mother's tighter. "Like a museum, you're not allowed to touch anything." Ellie stayed quiet, watching, her older than her years, eyes sweeping every corner, every wall, every object. Then she lifted her head and looked at her mother. "This house is sad because Uncle Tristan is sad. Right, Mom?" Bryn didn't answer, but she understood. This was where Tristan came to sleep, not to live. This was where he hid from the world, from memory, from pain. The lonely fortress of a man who'd given up on feeling. Tristan appeared at the top of the stairs, still in a black suit, his face unreadable. "Your rooms are on the 2nd floor. There's staff. If you need anything, tell them." Then he turned away, walked into a room, and shut the door, as if he didn't know what else to say, or didn't want to say anything else. Molly tugged her sister's hands, whispering with a grave little face, "We have to fix this house, and fix Uncle Tristan too." 2 weeks passed, and the Blackwood estate no longer recognized itself. Tristan discovered that one afternoon when he came home after a long meeting. He stepped through the front door, and the first thing he saw was a crayon drawing taped right onto the foyer wall. It showed 4 stick figures, one tall and black, one brown, and 3 tiny pink ones. All of them wore huge grins that took up nearly half their faces. Underneath, in shaky letters, it read, "Molly's family." He stood there for a few seconds, staring at it, not sure how he was supposed to react. Then he walked farther in and realized that was only the beginning. Drawings were everywhere. On the hallway walls, on the living room door, on the refrigerator in the kitchen, even on the door to his private office, the one space no one dared enter without permission. A rainbow, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, a purple cat with angel wings, and so many pictures of 4 stick figures holding hands. Toys littered the place like meteor fragments dropped from some bright foreign planet. Dolls lay sprawled across an expensive leather sofa. Legos scattered over the living room floor. A worn old teddy bear sat upright on the swivel chair in his study, as if it were the true owner of the room. Cat stickers, star stickers, heart stickers clung to the stainless steel refrigerator, to the mirror in the guest bathroom, even to his oak desk. Jude, one of his closest men, hovered nearby with an uneasy expression. "Boss, there's a drawing on your door." Tristan looked. A tall black stick figure with a stern face stood beside 3 smaller ones. Above it, the word said, "Uncle Tristan and us." "Leave it," he said. Jude blinked. "Sir?" I said, "Leave it." "Yes, sir." Tristan headed toward the kitchen, where the smell of homemade food drifted through the air, a scent that felt unfamiliar in this house, where he usually ate takeout or didn't eat at all. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, and the sight in front of him held him motionless. Bryn stood at the stove, an apron tied around her waist, stirring something in a pan. The 3 girls sat around the dining table, their homework open in front of them, but they were arguing over a math problem more than solving it. Warm yellow light spilled from the hanging lamp above the table. Not the cold white ceiling light he'd always used. Laughter, conversation, the sound of living. He couldn't remember the last time this house had held laughter. "Uncla," Molly spotted him first. She launched herself off her chair, flew toward him like a tiny hurricane, and wrapped both arms around his leg before he could react. Tristan went rigid. No one had hugged him since Meredith died. 4 years. 4 years without an embrace, without a touch meant to comfort. He'd forgotten what it felt like, and now a 6-year-old girl with brown curls was clinging to him as if he were the most precious thing in the world. He didn't know where to put his hands. Ellie and Daisy ran over too, hugging him from either side. 3 tiny girls surrounded a Mafia boss, and he stood there like a statue, his arms hovering in the air, unsure whether to lower them or lift them away. Bryn turned from the stove and took in the scene. She saw him stiff, confused, awkward as a child learning to walk for the first time. But he didn't push them away. He didn't step back. He simply stood there, enduring the embrace of 3 little girls as if he were trying to understand a language he'd forgotten long ago. She gave a small smile and turned back to the cooking. That dinner became the first family meal in this mansion since Meredith left it. Tristan sat at the head of the table, the seat he always took, but this time there were 4 others beside him. The girls talked over each other, eager to tell stories from school, about friends, about their teacher, about the caterpillar in science class. Bryn listened, slipping in a question now and then, or a gentle reminder, and Tristan sat there eating in silence, but for the first time in 4 years, he could actually taste the food. After dinner, while Bryn washed dishes, the 3 girls dragged Tristan into their room. "You have to read to us," Ellie declared, not a request but a command. Tristan stared at her. "I don't read stories." "You can read," Daisy argued, her innocent eyes fixed on him like he'd just said something ridiculous. "That's not the point." Tristan tried to explain, though he didn't know how. He was a Mafia boss. He gave orders to kill people. He didn't read fairy tales to children. Molly climbed onto the bed and patted the empty space beside her. "Sit here. We'll teach you." And somehow, 5 minutes later, Tristan Blackwood, whose name usually meant an ending, was now reading about a beginning, sitting on a bed with a princess storybook in his hands. 3 little girls gathered around him like baby birds waiting to be fed. He opened the first page and cleared his throat. "Once upon a time, there was a princess." His voice was flat, as if he were reading a financial report. No feeling, no rise or fall, just words coming out, mechanical and stripped down. The 3 girls looked at one another, then burst into giggles. "You're so bad at this." Ellie laughed until tears ran down her cheeks. "Princesses don't sound like robots," Daisy protested, clutching her stomach from laughing so hard. "Read it again, but this time you have to act," Molly demanded, her eyes bright. Tristan looked at them, not sure what acting was supposed to mean, but he tried. He read it again, attempting to change his voice, to add a little emotion. "Oh no, the dragon is coming." His voice was still flat, only a little higher at the end. The girls laughed even harder, not mocking, joyful, laughing because he was trying, because he looked ridiculous, because there was something genuinely funny about a man as frightening as him struggling with a fairy tale. He kept reading, about the princess, the prince, the dragon, the castle. His voice stayed stiff, still clumsy, but the girls stopped laughing. Their eyelids grew heavy. Their heads leaned against each other. By the time he reached the last page, all 3 were asleep. Ellie lay in the middle, arms wrapped around her sisters the way she always did. Daisy curled up like a cat. Molly hugged her worn teddy bear, but one hand still held the edge of Tristan's shirt, as if she was afraid he would disappear if she let go. Tristan sat there, watching 3 peaceful faces in sleep. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt like this. Peaceful, as if he belonged, as if he'd found a piece that had been missing for a very long time. A soft sound came from the doorway. He looked up. Bryn stood there, hair still damp from a shower, dressed in simple pajamas. How long had she been there? He didn't know. She didn't speak. She just looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Then she smiled. A real smile. Not polite, not guarded. A smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, and turned away. Tristan sat in the dark beside 3 sleeping children and thought of Meredith. What had she said, back then? You don't need to be loved. You need to be needed. For 4 years he hadn't understood that. Now, with Molly's small hand still gripping his shirt, with the steady breathing of 3 little girls around him, with Bryn's smile lingering in his mind, he began to understand. For the first time in 4 years, he didn't want to be alone. The first weekend after the three girls decided Tristan needed to learn how to cook turned into a memorable disaster. "You only eat restaurant food or takeout," Ellie observed with the grave expression of a doctor diagnosing a patient. "That's not good for your health. My mom is going to teach you how to make pasta." And so Tristan Blackwood, the man who ran Chicago's underground empire, stood in a kitchen wearing an apron Molly had decorated with a smiley face, holding a knife so awkwardly Bryn had to step in. "Not like that," she said. And then she moved behind him, placing both hands over his to correct his grip. They both froze for a single second, when skin met skin, when warmth traveled from her body into his, when the faint scent of strawberry shampoo drifted into his breath. Bryn let go first, stepping back, her voice a little rough. "Like that. It's not hard." Tristan didn't speak. He just kept chopping onions. But his heart was beating faster than usual, and he didn't understand why. The result of the cooking lesson was garlic burned black, tomato sauce splattered across the kitchen like the scene of a murder, and toast charred into something so solid it could have been used as activated charcoal. The girls laughed until their stomachs hurt, rolling on the kitchen floor without caring about cleanliness. Bryn tried to keep a serious face, and failed spectacularly, her laughter ringing through the kitchen like a melody Tristan had never heard in this house. And even though the dinner was almost impossible to eat, they still sat around the table, still ate bite after bite of mushy pasta, still laughed together as if it were the best meal in the world. It was the first family meal Tristan had truly helped cook, even if he'd nearly destroyed the kitchen in the process. One morning, a few days later, Bryn came down with a fever. She lay in bed, cheeks flushed, unable to get up. Tristan stood outside her door, and for the first time in his life he didn't know what to do. "I'll call a doctor," he said. "No need." Bryn shook her head weakly. "It's just a cold. But who's going to take the girls to school?" The answer was so obvious Tristan didn't need to say it. He would. But when the three girls appeared in front of him, their curls a tangled mess after a night of sleep, Molly looked up at him with worried eyes. "But who's going to braid our hair?" "Mom always braids it before school." Tristan stared at three messy heads. He'd commanded an entire shadow army, negotiated million-dollar deals, looked his enemies in the eyes without blinking. But braiding children's hair? That was completely foreign territory. 15 minutes later, he sat on a chair in the bathroom with his phone propped up in front of him playing a hair braiding tutorial, while Molly sat on the floor, patiently waiting. He tried to follow each step, his clumsy hands threading through soft, silky strands, trying to build something that resembled what he saw on the screen. The final result made all three girls burst into laughter when they looked in the mirror. "This isn't a braid," Ellie laughed until tears streamed down her face. "This is a bird's nest." "But I like it," Daisy hurried to say, as if afraid Tristan might feel hurt. "It's special." Molly turned to look at him, her eyes shining, and then she blurted it out without thinking. "I'm going to tell my friends my dad did it." The whole room froze. Molly didn't seem to realize what she'd just said. She kept smiling, kept twisting this way and that to admire her tangled crown in the mirror. But Ellie and Daisy looked at each other, then looked at Tristan, like their breath had stopped. And Tristan, the Mafia boss who didn't know fear, stood there as if struck by lightning, his heart pounding in his chest because of a single word from the mouth of a 6-year-old girl. Dad. No one had ever called him that. Not once. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just took them to school with their tangled masterpieces, and a heart breaking in a way he couldn't understand. That night, Tristan met with his men in his study, talking business and the threats coming from Moretti. The meeting was nearly over when Jude spoke up, his tone contemptuous. "Boss, forgive my intrusion, but I'm concerned about the security of this arrangement. This woman and her daughters, they represent a variable we can't control. I'm only worried that Moretti will use her presence to find a weakness in your defenses and eventually force a betrayal that puts you in grave danger." "Stop." Tristan's voice cut through the room, ice cold and sharp as a blade. Everyone fell silent. He stood and walked slowly toward Jude, each step like a sentence being handed down. "She's not a debtor. She's my guest. But sir, if anyone says one more word about her or her daughters..." Tristan stopped right in front of Jude, his eyes black as an abyss. "That person will leave this place. How? That'll be up to me." Deadly silence. No one dared breathe too loudly. Outside the meeting room door, Bryn stood there, still holding the tea tray she'd meant to bring in. She'd heard everything. She turned away, her heart beating faster than usual, and that night, for the first time, She looked at Tristan not with the wary caution of a woman depending on a dangerous man, but with something else, something warmer, and far more dangerous. At 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 month after they moved in, Tristan jolted awake with a scream strangled in his throat. He was drenched in sweat, his heart hammering wildly, and his hands still felt slick with blood even though it was only an illusion. The familiar nightmare. Meredith's blood on his hands, hot and red, slipping through his fingers like sand in an hourglass. Her whisper, "I love you," before her eyes closed forever. 4 years, and he still couldn't escape that night. Couldn't erase the helplessness of holding her as she died while he could do nothing. He sat upright, breathing hard, trying to force his heartbeat back into something normal in the darkness of a room that was too big, too empty. Soft, small footsteps outside the door made him lift his head. Molly stood there in rabbit pajamas, clutching the worn old teddy bear she never let go of. Her eyes were wide in the dark, watching him with a worry no 6-year-old should have carried. "I heard you yell," she said softly, her voice sleepy but full of concern. Tristan swallowed, trying to pull his composure back over himself. "I'm fine. Go back to sleep, sweetheart." But Molly didn't leave. She stepped inside, climbed onto the bed, and sat beside him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Did you dream about monsters?" Tristan was silent for a moment. Then he let out a breath. "Yeah, maybe. I dream about monsters too." Molly scooted closer, her head tilting. "The bad people pounding on our door. I dream they take Mom, take my sisters, and I'm alone in the closet forever." Tristan looked at her, and what he saw in those child-bright eyes made something in his chest ache. A maturity that didn't belong at this age. Fear trained into normalcy. A 6-year-old who knew how to hide in a closet when someone pounded on the door, how to hold her breath, how to stay quiet, how to erase her own existence like it was a survival skill. Molly suddenly pressed the teddy bear into his hands. "Mom says when you're scared, hug this bear. The bear will protect you." She looked at him with solemn seriousness. "You can borrow him. He'll protect you." Tristan stared down at the teddy bear in his hands, old and frayed, one eye replaced by a mismatched button. The most precious thing she owned, the thing she held every night just to feel safe, and she was giving it to him. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Molly nodded and climbed down from the bed, but before she slipped out the door, she turned back. "You're not a monster, Uncle Tristan. Monsters don't read stories. You read badly, but you still read, so you're a good man." Then she disappeared into the hallway, leaving Tristan alone with a worn teddy bear and a heart melting in ways he hadn't expected. He sat there until morning, staring out the window, the bear still in his hands. A few nights later, Bryn went out to the balcony because she couldn't sleep. She needed air. She needed space to think. She needed a break from 4 walls, even if this room was 10 times bigger than her old apartment. She didn't expect Tristan to be there too, leaning on the railing, staring out at the city of Chicago glittering in the night. "You can't sleep?" she asked, then realized she'd used you instead of sir, the way she always did. But she didn't correct herself. "Me neither," he answered, not turning to look at her. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, but strangely comfortable. Bryn stepped closer until she stood beside him, watching the distant lights. "Why did you really help me?" she asked, her voice light as wind. "Not because of Moretti. You could hurt them without using me." Tristan stayed quiet for so long, Bryn thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and far away. "Because of your daughter's eyes. They looked at me like I could be a good man. No one has looked at me like that in 4 years." Bryn turned to him and saw the scar on his jaw catching moonlight. Saw dark eyes fixed on the distance with a sadness he wasn't hiding. "Your wife?" she asked gently. "What was she like?" "She believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. She must have been special. She died because she believed in me." His voice wasn't raw. It was empty, like he'd said the sentence to himself so many times it had lost its weight. Bryn didn't think. She placed her hand on his arm, the first time she'd touched him on purpose. "She died because she loved you. That isn't your fault. That was her choice." Tristan looked down at her hand on his arm, small, warm, and he couldn't remember the last time anyone had touched him without fear, without business. "You should go sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Bryn nodded, took her hand away, and turned to go. But before she stepped back inside, she stopped. "Tristan?" It was the first time she'd said his name, not Blackwood, Not Sir, but Tristan. Like they were something familiar. Like he wasn't a mafia boss and she wasn't a woman taking shelter under him. He turned. What? Thank you. For everything. She left. And Tristan stayed alone on the balcony, realizing he was in serious trouble. Because for the first time in 4 years, someone had made him want to be called by his name instead of by fear. 3 months had passed since that night on the balcony, and everything had changed in ways neither Tristan nor Bryn dared to admit out loud. Shared dinners had become routine, late-night conversations had grown more frequent, and the distance between them, once as wide as an abyss, had narrowed into something dangerous. But tonight, when Tristan came home close to midnight, something was different. Bryn was sitting in the living room waiting for him, the way she had been most nights lately, even though she never admitted she was waiting. She heard the front door open, heard footsteps heavier than usual, and when she lifted her head, her heart seemed to stop. Tristan stood there with one hand braced against the wall, his face drained pale, and on the shoulder of his black suit jacket a wet stain was spreading wider and wider. Blood. You're hurt. Bryn shot to her feet, her voice turning sharp. It's nothing. He tried to stand straighter, tried to walk like everything was normal. But his legs wobbled and he would have fallen if Bryn hadn't rushed to catch him. You're bleeding through your clothes, she said, her voice shaking but firm. That isn't nothing. She helped him down onto the sofa, not caring that blood would ruin the expensive upholstery. She ran to get the first aid kit she'd bought herself and hidden in her room since the day they moved in, as if she'd known there would come a day she'd need it. When she returned, Tristan had taken off his jacket, and the wound on his shoulder showed through a white dress shirt soaked red. Take your shirt off, she ordered, in a tone that didn't accept argument. Tristan looked at her for a moment, then did it. The cut was long and deep, clearly from a knife, but luckily it hadn't hit an artery. Bryn cleaned her hands quickly with alcohol. Then she went to work. Her movements were quick, precise, professional, disinfecting the wound, checking its depth, preparing needle and thread to stitch. Tristan watched her in silence, realizing what he'd suspected for a long time. You're a nurse. It wasn't a question. Bryn didn't look up, still focused on the wound. I am. I just didn't have the money to renew my license. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to owe you more than I already do. She began to stitch, each pass of the needle neat and steady. They were so close Tristan could smell her hair, the clean, simple scent of soap, not expensive perfume or anything elaborate. Just her, just Bryn, and somehow that distracted him more than any perfume ever could. She leaned in closer to check the line of stitches, her face only inches from his, and Tristan realized her hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear of blood, not from lack of skill, from something else. You should be more careful, she said softly, her eyes still fixed on the wound. Why? Because... She stopped, her hands shaking a little more. Because the girls are used to having you. They'll be sad if something happens to you. The girls? Tristan asked, his voice low. Bryn lifted her head, and her eyes met his, and suddenly the space between them felt so small she could see tiny flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath brush her cheek. What about you? He asked, his voice like a whisper. Silence stretched. Bryn didn't answer. She looked back down at the wound and kept stitching the final passes, but her hands shook so much she had to stop for a second to steady herself. She finished the bandage, tidy and professional the way she did everything. Then she stood up too quickly. Don't let it get infected, she said, her voice a little rough. Rest. I'll tell the girls you came home late because of work. Then she left, fast, like she was running from something, without looking back. Tristan sat alone on the sofa, staring down at the clean bandage on his shoulder, thinking about the question she hadn't answered, and the answer he'd already seen in her eyes, in her trembling hands, in the way she fled instead of facing it. For the first time in 4 years, Tristan wanted to live, not for revenge, not for business, but because someone would worry if he died. After the night Bryn stitched Tristan's shoulder, a new habit settled between them, one neither of them ever put into words. Every evening after the girls fell asleep, they met in the library, a vast room lined with ceiling-high shelves of books Tristan had never read, with a soft leather sofa and warm yellow light. They read, or they talked, or they simply sat in silence together. And somehow the silence between them stopped feeling heavy and became comfortable, as if they'd grown so used to each other's presence they no longer needed words to fill the space. Tonight, Bryn was holding an old novel she'd found on the shelf, but she wasn't really reading. Her eyes moved over lines she didn't absorb, because she knew Tristan was watching her. She could feel his gaze like invisible heat on her skin, and it made it impossible to focus on anything else. "You're staring at me," she said, her eyes still on the page. "Maybe. Why?" "Because you're beautiful." Bryn set the book down and stood up too fast, turning her back to him. Her heart was beating so hard she was afraid he could hear it. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking more than she wanted. "Don't what?" Tristan stood as well, and she heard his footsteps coming closer. "Don't say things like that. I can't. I shouldn't." "Shouldn't what?" Bryn spun around, and he was right in front of her, closer than she'd expected, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. And then she broke. Everything she'd held in for months, spilling out like a dam giving way. "I shouldn't love a mafia boss. I shouldn't put my children in danger. I shouldn't think about you every night before I fall asleep. Worry every time you come home late. Feel terrified every time you get hurt." She stopped, realizing what she'd just admitted, and heat rushed into her face. Tristan stood there, looking at her with dark eyes she couldn't read, and her stomach dropped. She'd said too much. She'd shattered the boundary she'd tried to keep in place. "Are you in love with me?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "I didn't say that." She tried to deny it, even though they both knew it was a lie. "You said you shouldn't love. That means you're—" "I don't know," Bryn almost shouted, her voice cracking. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm feeling. I just know that every time you come home late, I can't sleep. Every time you're hurt, I want to cry. Every time you smile at the girls, I want to." She didn't finish the sentence, because she couldn't make herself. Tristan stepped closer, took her hand, and she didn't pull away. His hand was warm and large, swallowing her smaller one. "I don't know what I'm doing either," he said, his voice soft as a confession. "I thought I died 4 years ago, with Meredith. I thought I'd only exist, not live, until someone finally ended me." He looked down at her hand in his. "But you and the girls, you make me want to live again. You give me a reason to come home every night, to be more careful, to not die." Bryn looked at him, into those deep black eyes that were holding something she'd never seen in him before. Vulnerability, honesty, fear. And she stopped thinking. She rose onto her toes, grabbed his collar with both hands, pulled him down, and kissed him. The kiss was fierce, desperate, like she was gambling the last thing she had. She kissed him as if tomorrow didn't exist, as if this were the only chance, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life without knowing it. And Tristan answered, gentler, softer, as if she were something precious that might break if he wasn't careful. His hand settled at her waist, drawing her close, and Bryn melted into his arms as if she'd been made to fit there. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, forehead to forehead, eyes locked on eyes. "This is a mistake," Bryn whispered. "Maybe," Tristan replied, his voice rough, "but I don't regret it. Neither do I." They didn't sleep separately that night, not in the way people might imagine, but lying side by side on the library sofa, talking until morning, about the past, about fear, about what they wanted and what they didn't dare hope for. And when dawn slid through the windows, both of them finally fell asleep, hands still clasped. Whispering woke them. Bryn opened her eyes and nearly fell off the sofa when she saw the 3 girls standing in front of them, arms crossed, faces so serious it was almost frightening. "We knew it," Ellie announced. Bryn sat bolt upright, her face flaming. "Knew what?" "That Uncle Tristan likes Mom," Daisy said, her eyes sparkling. "And Mom likes him too," Molly added. "A lot." Tristan sat up beside Bryn, calm in a way that surprised her. "Do you girls have a problem with that?" The 3 girls turned, pressed their heads together, whispering like they were holding a secret meeting, then faced him again with solemn expressions. "We have conditions," Ellie said, sounding like a lawyer reading a contract. "You have to promise you won't leave our mom," Daisy continued. "Like Ryan Dad left," Molly finished, her voice smaller now, sadder. Tristan looked at the 3 girls, and then he did something Bryn didn't expect. He knelt down until he was level with their eyes and spoke in the most serious voice she'd ever heard from him. "I promise." "How do you promise?" Ellie asked, narrowing her eyes in suspicion. "On my life." The 3 girls looked at each other, and then all at once they lunged forward to hug him, and Tristan hugged them back. This time not stiff, not awkward. "Okay," Molly shouted. You're allowed to love our mom. Bryn sat there with tears falling before she even realized it, watching the man she loved holding her 3 daughters, and hearing him say words she'd never dared to dream she'd hear. I am here now. I will never leave you. I promise. 1 week after their first kiss, everything felt so perfect. Bryn almost forgot what kind of world they were living in. Tristan kissed her every morning before he left for work. The girls called him Dad as naturally as if there had never been anyone else. Dinner came with laughter. Late nights came with conversations and kisses in the library. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, real happiness existed, even in the dark. But Bryn still didn't know what Tristan truly did. She knew he was a mafia boss, knew he was dangerous, knew people feared him, but knowing and witnessing were 2 completely different things. That night, she woke at 2 o'clock in the morning and Tristan wasn't beside her. She went looking for him, her feet carrying her down the stairs, through the hallway, to a door she'd never opened, leading to a basement she'd never set foot in. The door was slightly ajar, warm yellow light spilling out, and she heard voices. She looked through the crack, and the blood in her veins turned to ice. Tristan stood there in an empty room with a cold concrete floor, facing a man tied to a chair. Tristan stood in the center of the cold room, his shadow stretching long and menacing against the concrete. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a sheer, lethal weight that seemed to crush the air out of the room. He looked less like a man and more like a force of nature, stripped of every ounce of the kindness he showed the girls. And Tristan stood there with a blank expression, cold as stone, like he wasn't the man who read fairy tales to her daughters, not the man who kissed her gently in the library, not the man who promised he would never leave them. You have 10 seconds to tell me who sent you, Tristan said, his voice ice cold. The man trembled, his voice breaking under the suffocating pressure of Tristan's silence. He looked at Tristan as if he were staring into his own grave, whispering desperate pleas for a mercy that the man standing before him no longer seemed capable of giving. Tristan gave a signal to the man standing beside him, a slight nod, no words needed, and Bryn couldn't look anymore. She ran back to the bedroom, her heart pounding out of control, her hands shaking so hard she could barely open the door. She sat on the bed in the dark and tried to breathe, tried to understand, tried to reconcile the gentle hands that braided her daughter's hair with the cold, lethal shadow she had just witnessed in the dark. This was him. This was who he really was. Not the man who spent an hour struggling with clumsy, knotted braids for her girls. Not the man who clumsily read a story in a robotic voice. But the man who tortured someone in the basement without blinking. The next morning, Tristan was normal. He kissed her forehead, greeted the girls, ate breakfast with them, wearing the small smile she'd learned to love. And Bryn couldn't meet his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, dark eyes watching her. "Nothing," she lied. And they both knew it was a lie. In the days that followed, Bryn lived in a private hell. She watched the girls, watched the way they loved Tristan, the way they called him Dad, the way they were happy for the first time in their lives. Then she thought about what she'd seen that night, the blood on the floor, the begging, Tristan's cold gaze. She realized the peace her daughters now enjoyed was bought with a currency of violence she had never dared to imagine. She was in love with a man whose hands were stained to keep her world clean. She was letting her daughters call him Dad. She began secretly looking for a new apartment, for work in another city. She didn't know where she'd go, didn't know how she'd protect herself and the girls without Tristan, but she couldn't stay here, couldn't love a murderer, couldn't let her children grow up in this world. But where could she go? Moretti was still out there. Without Tristan, they would find her. Nowhere was safe. And the girls, how broken would they be if they had to leave the man they called Dad? Tristan saw that something was wrong. He wasn't stupid. He saw her avoiding his eyes, saw her pulling her hand away when he touched her, saw she no longer waited for him in the library every night. "You're avoiding me," he said one evening when they were alone in the living room. "I'm not, Bryn." He took her hand and she almost flinched. "I know when you're lying. You know a lot of things, Tristan. But you don't know me. What did you see last night?" Bryn went still. She wanted to deny it, wanted to say nothing, but his eyes told her he already knew. "I know you went down to the basement." Silence stretched, heavy as stone. Then Bryn spoke, her voice trembling with a truth she finally saw. "I saw you, Tristan. I saw the man who lives in the shadows. How can you carry so much blood on your hands and still hold my children?" Tristan didn't look away. "I am the wall that keeps the darkness out, Bryn. To keep your world bright, mine must remain pitch black. I don't ask for your forgiveness, only for your safety. Protecting us? By torturing people? That man was sent by Moretti to watch your girls. He had photos of Ellie, Daisy, and Molly at school. He knew their schedule, where they went, where they came back. Bryn went pale. I do what I have to do to keep you safe, Tristan continued, his voice holding no apology, no excuse. I'm not sorry for it. I'll do anything to protect you and the girls. Anything. Bryn looked at him, into dark eyes that held something like desperation, and she didn't know what to do. She loved him, but she was afraid of him. She needed him, but she hated what he did. I need time, she said at last, her voice exhausted. I'll wait. Bryn stayed, but she kept her distance. No more kisses in the library, no more late-night conversations, no more hand touches or lingering looks. She stayed for the girls, for safety, because there was nowhere else to go. But she built an invisible wall between them, and Tristan, for the first time in his life, learned what it meant to fear losing someone not because they died, but because they chose to leave. The cemetery lay on the outskirts of Chicago, quiet and gray beneath an autumn sky. Tristan stood alone before a white marble grave, a bouquet of white flowers in his hands, the kind Meredith had loved. For 4 years he had come here once a month, standing in silence, saying nothing, only staring at the name carved into stone and feeling guilty for still breathing when she no longer could. But today was different. Today he needed to speak. I need to tell you something, he began, his voice rough in the cold wind. I met a woman. She has 3 little daughters. He paused, looking down at the white petals in his hands. They call me Dad. For the first time in my life, I want to deserve that name. The wind moved through the grass around the grave, and Tristan imagined Meredith listening. But she saw me. She saw the monster. She saw what I do to protect the people I love. He knelt and set the bouquet at the base of the headstone. You used to say I wasn't a monster, that I only did a monster's work, but I can't see that line anymore. And neither can she. He remembered Meredith, her smile, the way she looked at him like he was the best man in the world even though she knew exactly who he was. The last words she spoke before her eyes closed still echoed in his mind every night. Live on. For 4 years he hadn't understood what that meant. He thought living on meant continuing to breathe, continuing to work, continuing to exist. But now, with Bryn and the girls, he understood. Living on wasn't existence. Living on was having someone worth living for. I'm asking your permission, Tristan said, his voice catching. Permission to love again. I won't forget you. Never. But my heart is big enough for you and for her. I hope you understand. The wind rose, and Tristan smiled for the first time while standing in this place. Thank you. For everything. At the same time, back at the estate, Bryn was watching the world around her through the eyes of someone who had survived the foster system. She'd learned young how to read people, how to recognize a lie, how to sense danger before it arrived. That instinct had kept her alive through 18 years without a family, and now it was flaring because of Jude. Something was wrong with Tristan's trusted lieutenant. She didn't know exactly what, but she could feel it. Jude asked about her and the girls' schedule too often, questions that sounded normal but were too detailed, too specific. He took calls at strange hours, always stepping into shadowed corners to speak, his voice low as if he didn't want anyone to overhear. And he looked at her with a strange expression, not the contempt he'd worn before Tristan warned him off, but something more calculating, like he was measuring her, weighing a decision. Bryn didn't confront him. She'd lived long enough to know when to stay silent and watch. She only noted it all. Each small detail, each unusual behavior, waiting until she was sure. One afternoon, she saw Jude outside in the yard, talking on the phone, his eyes cutting toward the window of the girls' room. She couldn't hear what he said, but the way he ended the call too quickly, when he noticed her watching, told her everything. The conclusion formed in her mind, clear and cold. Jude wasn't loyal. There was a traitor inside this house. She needed to tell Tristan, but they were keeping their distance. She was avoiding him, and every conversation between them now felt tense and short. It can wait, she told herself. She would watch longer, gather more proof, and then speak. She was wrong. She didn't know that sometimes, one day of delay could change everything. The next morning, Bryn decided she couldn't wait any longer. Even if she and Tristan were keeping their distance, even if every conversation between them had turned short and tense, She still needed the truth about Jude before she spoke to Tristan. She found Jude in the hallway, heading toward the back door, and she stepped into his path with the most ordinary expression she could manage. "Jude, how long have you worked for Tristan?" Jude stopped, watching her with wary eyes. "Why are you asking?" "Just curious." Bryn let a small smile appear, playing harmless. "You seem different from the others here." Jude studied her for a moment, then snorted, contempt rising openly across his face. He didn't bother hiding it anymore, as if she were just some foolish woman not worth caution. "What do you know about this work?" "I know enough." Bryn held his gaze, her tone still gentle but her eyes sharp with cold certainty. "Enough to know when someone's hiding something." Jude laughed, and it was the biggest mistake he could have made. He underestimated her, assumed she was only a weak woman sheltering under Tristan, incapable of doing anything. "You're smart," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But it's too late." Bryn went still. "Too late for what?" "For your boss. And for you." Jude stepped closer, lowering his voice as if he were sharing a secret. "Moretti pays a lot more than Blackwood. And someone really wants to see you again. Someone who's been waiting 6 years. Bryn's heart seemed to stop. "Ryan?" The name slipped from her mouth like a curse. Jude smiled, a cruel smile. "He didn't run the way you thought. He was just waiting for the right time. And now that you've got value because of Blackwood, he wants to take back what belongs to him." Bryn tried to run, tried to find Tristan, tried to reach anyone who could help. But Jude was faster. He blocked her path without touching her, standing there like a wall. "Don't worry," he said, his calmness suddenly terrifying. "It'll happen tomorrow. You've got one last night with your boss." Then he walked away, leaving her trembling in the hallway, her heart pounding wildly as she fought to think. She had to tell Tristan. Right now. But when she ran to his office, he'd been gone since early morning for an urgent matter, and she had no way to reach him. She called, but no one answered. She texted, but nothing came back. That night, she didn't sleep, holding her daughters tight in their room, the door locked, her eyes fixed on the dark. The next morning, Tristan still wasn't home. Bryn decided to take the girls to school like usual, where Tristan's security team was, the safest place outside the estate. She didn't know Jude had handled the security team the night before. They'd only been beyond the estate gate for a few minutes when the car was stopped in the road. 2 black vehicles surged in from both sides, forcing the driver to brake. Moretti's men poured out, black masks, guns in their hands, and Bryn knew this was the moment. "Run!" she screamed at her daughters, even though she knew there was nowhere to run. She yanked the door open, tried to pull the girls out, tried to find an escape, but there were too many of them, too fast, too ruthless. The 3 girls were torn from her in seconds. Ellie screamed, "Mom," as a man dragged her away. Daisy sobbed, "Please don't," as she was lifted off the ground. And Molly, the brave youngest one, bit the hand gripping her and screamed with everything in her small body. "Dad will come! Dad will come save us!" Bryn fought like an animal, hitting, clawing, biting, doing anything she could to protect her children. But she was one woman against 10 armed men. A blow to the head sent her stumbling, the world spinning, and she nearly blacked out. Then a voice rang out, a voice she'd prayed she'd never have to hear again. "Hi, Bryn. Miss me?" She lifted her head, and the blood in her veins turned to ice. Ryan stood there, stepping out of a black car, barely changed after 6 years, still wearing that charming smile she'd once loved, a smile that now made her sick. He looked at her like she was a lost possession he'd finally recovered. "You're alive?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've always been alive, baby. I just didn't want responsibility." Ryan moved closer, looking at the 3 girls who were crying, calling for their mother, calling for Dad. "Why come back?" "Because now you're valuable. Thanks to Mr. Blackwood." Ryan laughed, the laugh she'd once thought was beautiful, now nothing but ugly and cruel. "I'm taking my wife and kids back, or I'll use you to trade for something from Blackwood." "I'm not your wife," Bryn said, her voice cold as steel even as her heart was breaking. "You abandoned us. You died to us the day you walked out. Paper doesn't matter. They're my kids. They don't know who you are, and they never will." The girls were shoved into a car, and Bryn was dragged after them. But before the door slammed, she managed one thing. Her fingers secretly pressed the button on the bracelet Tristan had put on her the first day, the tracking device he'd said would keep her safe. He'll come, she thought as darkness swallowed her whole. He promised. Tristan's office was in the middle of an important meeting when his phone vibrated, the screen flashing the signal he'd prayed he'd never have to see. Bryn's tracker had been activated. He froze mid-sentence, eyes locked on the display, and everyone in the room saw something shift on their boss's face. It wasn't an explosion of rage. It wasn't shouting or smashing things. It was silence, calm, a coldness spreading like poisonous fog, thickening the air until it felt hard to breathe. This was the Tristan Blackwood all of Chicago feared, not the man who read fairy tales or braided bird's nest hair, but the devil who'd built an empire out of the blood and bones of his enemies. "Cancel everything," he said, his voice stripped of emotion. Connor shot to his feet, knowing instantly something was wrong. "Brother, what happened?" They took Bryn and the girls. Connor's face went pale. "Moretti?" And Jude. The name stunned the entire room. Jude, the trusted lieutenant, the man who'd followed Tristan for 5 years, was a traitor. But no one dared speak. No one dared ask for more, because Tristan's eyes right now could kill. "Call everyone," he ordered, his voice hard as steel. "Everyone who can hold a gun." "What's the plan?" Connor asked. "None of them live if Bryn or the girls gets even a scratch." He stood, opened the cabinet, and took out a gun, a knife, everything he needed. This wasn't a negotiation. This was war. And Tristan Blackwood didn't ever lose a war. Meanwhile, in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago, Bryn and the 3 little girls were being held in an empty room with a cold concrete floor and weak yellow light. The girls sat pressed together in a corner, eyes red from crying but trying not to make a sound. Ellie gripped her sister's hands, whispering again and again like a prayer, "Dad will come. Don't be scared. Dad will come." Bryn stood in front of them like a shield, even though she knew her thin body couldn't stop bullets or knives, but she'd die before she let anyone touch her children. Ryan walked in with a smug smile, like he was savoring this moment. "So you found someone to replace me, huh?" he asked, his tone mocking. "A mafia boss? I've got to admit, you know how to upgrade. From a useless gambler like me to the kingpin of Chicago. Anyone's better than you." Bryn shot back, her voice cold as ice. Ryan laughed and stepped closer, looking toward the 3 trembling girls in the corner. "I'm their father. Blood is blood, and no one can change that." "You're not their father," Bryn said, her voice filling the empty room, strong and dripping with contempt. Ryan stopped, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "What did you say?" "I said you're not their father." Bryn stepped forward, placing herself completely between Ryan and her daughters. "A father's the one who gets up at 3 in the morning when his kid's got a fever. A father's the one who reads stories every night, even if he reads with a monotone cadence. A father's the one who learns to braid hair on YouTube, even if the result is nothing more than a lovable, tangled disaster. A father's the one who promises he'll never leave them and keeps that promise." She stared straight into Ryan's eyes without a flicker of fear. "You're just a sperm donor. You left when they were 8 months old. You dumped debt and disappeared. You've got no right to stand here and call yourself dad." Ryan went white with fury. The slap came fast and hard, sending Bryn staggering, blood spilling at the corner of her mouth. She hit the cold concrete floor, her ears ringing from the blow, but she didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't beg. The girls screamed. "Don't hit Mom," Molly shrieked, her voice breaking in tears. "Don't hit my mother." Ellie and Daisy clutched her tight, all 3 shaking like leaves in a storm, but their eyes on Ryan held something that wasn't fear. It was hatred, pure hatred from children who'd watched their mother get hurt too many times. Moretti walked in then, looking at the scene with bored annoyance. "Enough," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Blackwood'll be here soon." "What's the plan?" Ryan asked, his face still flushed with rage. "He'll have to choose," Moretti explained, a cruel smile on his mouth. "Revenge on me, or saving them. If he chooses revenge, they'll die before he can lay a hand on me. If he chooses to save them, he'll have to let me walk. Either way, I win." Bryn pushed herself up, wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand, and laughed, a small sound with no fear in it. Moretti frowned at her. "What are you laughing at?" "He'll do both," Bryn said, her voice certain, like she was stating a law of physics. Moretti snorted. "No one can do both." "He'll do both," Bryn repeated, her eyes bright with something like absolute faith. because that's what a devil does when someone touches what's his. And as if to prove her right, gunfire exploded outside. Gunfire kept exploding outside, not a few scattered shots, but a full symphony of violence. And Bryn knew he'd come. Moretti's guards dropped one by one, without time to fight back, without time to cry out, only the crack of bullets, and then silence. Tristan hadn't come alone. He'd brought an army, and they hadn't come to negotiate. The warehouse doors blew open, and Tristan stepped in like darkness condensed into a man. His eyes swept the room in an instant, searching, and when his gaze found Bryn, when he saw the blood at the corner of her mouth, when he saw 3 little girls trembling in the corner, something in those black eyes died and was replaced by hell. Connor moved in with the rear guard, sealing every exit. Tristan's men outnumbered Moretti's 3-1, and the ones still breathing dropped their guns and surrendered. This wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter already decided. Tristan walked past the bodies of guards without hesitation, his eyes never leaving Bryn and the girls, and when he reached the center of the room, both Moretti and Ryan stepped back, even though neither of them wanted to admit they'd done it. "Dad," Molly screamed, trying to run to Tristan, but one of Moretti's men held her back. Ellie and Daisy cried out too, their voices breaking with tears and hope. "Dad, you came." Moretti forced himself calm, yanking out his gun and aiming it at Bryn. "One more step and she dies." Tristan stopped, but not because he was afraid. He looked at Moretti with an expression that made the man holding the gun swallow hard. "If she dies, you die too. And your death will be slow. I'll make sure you feel every second of it." Ryan cut in, his voice shaking while he tried to sound strong. "That's my wife and kids. You don't have the right to come here and take them." Tristan turned his head to Ryan, and the way he looked at him made the man shrink like a worm. "She's not your wife. She's mine." Tristan's voice was ice, each word a blade. "And those 3 children are my daughters. You don't have the right," Ryan started. "I have every right," Tristan cut him off, stepping forward 1 pace. "I'm the one who's been with them for months. I'm the one who reads to them every night, braids their hair every morning, holds them when they have nightmares. I'm the one they call Dad. And you?" He looked at Ryan with open contempt. "You're just a coward who ran when your kids could barely roll over." Moretti raised the gun higher, finger tightening on the trigger. "Blackwood, back off or you'll what?" Tristan asked, his calmness turning monstrous. "Kill her? And then what? You think you walk out of here? Look around." Moretti glanced around, and for the first time he understood the situation. His men were all pinned down. Tristan's people surrounded him from every side, guns trained on him from a dozen angles. There was no way out. "Tristan." Bryn's voice rose, gentle but clear. He looked at her, and she saw the fury in his eyes, roaring for release, demanding vengeance for every drop of blood on her mouth, every tear from the girls. "Don't kill them." Tristan stared at her like she'd said something impossible. "They kidnapped you. They made you bleed. They threatened the girls. And I'm still alive," Bryn said, her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "I'm still here. The girls are still safe. That's enough. Not enough." Tristan shook his head, his hand clenched around his gun. "Moretti killed Meredith. Now he tried to kill you. He has to die. Listen to me." Bryn stepped forward and placed herself between Tristan and Moretti, and she heard both sides take a sharp breath. "If you kill them, you'll have to live with it. The girls will know their father is a killer. I'll have to look at you every day and remember you killed someone because of me." She laid her hand on his chest, feeling his heart pounding hard beneath the fabric. "I don't want that. I want to go home. I want to hold my girls. I want to be with you. Please." Tristan looked at her, into those green eyes fixed on him with absolute trust, and the fury inside him slowly eased. It didn't vanish. It just tightened under control, locked behind bars because of the woman standing in front of him. "Connor," he said, his voice still cold but no longer deadly. "Let them go." Connor looked shocked, but he obeyed. Moretti's men were released, and the 3 girls were freed and instantly ran to Tristan, clinging to his legs, sobbing. Tristan looked at Moretti, the man who'd killed his wife, the man he'd sworn to erase. "You've got 2 minutes. Leave Chicago. If I see you again, you won't get a second chance." Moretti, bleeding and out of options, nodded and stumbled away. Tristan turned to Ryan, his gaze even colder than it had been for Moretti. "And you. If you come within 100 miles of my wife and daughters, you'll disappear. Forever. No one will ever find your body." Ryan went white, then turned and ran after Moretti like a dog with its tail between its legs. And when the room held only them, Bryn ran into Tristan's arms. The three girls wrapped around his legs. And for the first time in 4 years, Tristan Blackwood cried. Outside the warehouse, beneath the late afternoon sun fading toward dusk, Bryn stood in the middle of Tristan's men and did something no one expected. She slapped him. Hard. The sound cracked through the air, freezing everyone in place, even Connor standing nearby. Tristan's head turned with the force of it, his cheek flushing red. But he didn't dodge, didn't block. He just stood there and took it. "Don't ever," Bryn said, her voice shaking with anger and relief, and a million other feelings she couldn't name. "Don't ever tell me to stay home and wait when my children are in danger. Don't ever let me not know where you are when I need you. Don't ever." She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she grabbed his collar, yanked him down, and kissed him. Right there in front of his men who were staring. Right in front of 3 little girls giggling even with their eyes still red from crying. Right in front of the whole world if the whole world had been watching. She kissed him like he was air, and she was drowning, like it was the first kiss, and the last. Like she needed him to know that even if she slapped him, even if she was furious, even if she was afraid of him, she still loved him so much it hurt. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Bryn said, her voice breaking, "I love you, and I hate it." "Why hate it?" Tristan asked, forehead to forehead, eyes locked on eyes. "Because you're dangerous, bossy, controlling, and you've got no right to make me love you this much. But you still love me. I still love you." Bryn laughed through tears. "So you have to take responsibility." Tristan wrapped her in his arms, right there while his men pretended not to look, right in front of Connor grinning like an idiot, right in front of 3 little girls clinging to their legs and crying from happiness. "I love you. I love these 3 little girls. I don't know how to be a husband, how to be a father. I never learned, but I will learn. I'll try every day. If you give me the chance." "Say yes, Mom," Molly shouted from below. "Molly," Ellie pinched her. "But the answer's obvious," Daisy defended her. Bryn laughed, the sound breaking open through tears, and she nodded. "Yes, the answer is yes." About that black moment, about the days she kept her distance, about the night she saw his darkness. Bryn spoke softly when they were in the car on the way home. The 3 girls asleep from exhaustion. "I'm sorry I wanted to leave." "You had the right to be afraid," Tristan replied, his hand holding hers. "I'm a monster. I told you that." "No." Bryn shook her head, placing her palm on his chest where his heart was beating. "You're a monster learning how to be human. And that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." 6 months later, life had returned to normal, or normal the way it could be for the Blackwood family. Moretti had vanished. Nobody knew where he was, and nobody cared. Ryan had vanished into the shadows of his own cowardice, living every breath in the paralyzing fear that the monster he had awoken would one day come to collect the debt of his existence. As for Jude, his betrayal met a swift and absolute conclusion. He was erased from the city he once called home, leaving behind no trace but a cold, silent warning to anyone who might ever dream of touching what belonged to Blackwood. In Tristan's world, there was no mercy for those who traded family for blood money. The mansion was full of color now, full of laughter, full of life. Drawings were still taped everywhere. Toys were still scattered across the floor. Cat stickers still owned the refrigerator. And Tristan, the guardian of the city's secrets, who now guarded his daughter's dreams, still read bedtime stories in his wooden tone every night, and braided their messy knots every morning. On an ordinary morning, not a special day, not an anniversary of anything, Bryn was standing in the kitchen making coffee. The kitchen was messy with breakfast dishes, with cereal boxes left open, with spilled milk on the table that nobody had wiped up yet. The 3 girls were eating and arguing about who got to watch TV first, their voices loud in the warm space. This was her life now. Messy, chaotic, loud, and perfect. Tristan walked into the kitchen, and Bryn turned to hand him his coffee like always. But he wasn't standing in the doorway. He was kneeling. Right there on the kitchen floor, beside the spilled milk and the open cereal box, Tristan Blackwood was down on one knee, looking up at her with black eyes she'd learned to love. "Tristan?" Bryn set the coffee down, her hands starting to tremble. "What are you doing?" The 3 girls suddenly appeared behind him, and Bryn realized they'd known about this. Ellie held a small black velvet box. Daisy held a flower picked from the garden, a little wilted and crooked, but cradled like treasure. And Molly, the youngest, held a handmade sign cut from cardboard, scribbled in crayon. "Say yes, Mom." "Bryn Mitchell," Tristan began, and his voice wasn't cold or frightening now, only sincere, with a tremor she'd never heard from him before. "You gave me my life back. When I met you, I was only existing, waiting to die, with nothing worth living for. Then 3 little girls showed up and asked me if I was a bad man, and you showed up with eyes that weren't afraid of me, and everything changed." He took the ring box from Ellie, opened it, and a diamond ring flashed under the kitchen light. "You and these 3 little daughters turned a cold house into a family. You turned me from a monster into a man. You gave me a reason to come home every night, to be careful when I work, to want to live one more day." He looked at her, his eyes shining with something like tears, shed by a man who had finally found a home worth weeping for. "I don't deserve you, I know that, but I'll spend my whole life trying. Will you be my wife?" Molly couldn't wait another second. She jumped up, held the sign high, and screamed with everything in her small body. "Say yes, Mom. Say yes." "Molly," Ellie grabbed her. "This is Mom's moment." "But Mom's crying." Daisy pointed at Bryn. "Crying means she's happy." Bryn was crying, tears running down her cheeks, but she was also laughing so hard she couldn't stop. She looked at Tristan kneeling on the messy kitchen floor, looked at the 3 girls bouncing around them, looked at the ring shining in velvet, and she nodded. "Yes. Oh my God, yes. 1,000,000 times yes." Tristan stood, slid the ring onto her finger, and kissed her to the sound of the girls cheering. But before the kiss could end, he pulled something from his pocket, and Bryn looked down, a few crumpled $1 bills and a handful of coins. $5.37. "You kept it?" Ellie's eyes went wide. "This is the most important contract of my life," Tristan said, looking at the 3 girls with a tenderness Bryn never thought she'd see in a Mafia boss. "You hired me to protect your mom with every cent you had. I'm keeping it forever." "You have to give it back," Molly demanded, hands on her hips. "We're saving up to buy a cat." "A deal is a deal," Tristan shook his head solemnly, even as the corner of his mouth fought a smile. "This money's mine now." Bryn pulled all 4 of them into her arms, her family, the man she loved, the 3 daughters who'd found her a father, and $5.37 that had changed everything. "We're rich now," Molly declared, her voice as serious as a philosopher. "Rich in love," and no one laughed, because she was right. 6 months after the proposal in that messy kitchen, the wedding took place in the garden of the estate, small and warm, not a lavish party with hundreds of guests, but only family and the closest people in their lives. Bryn didn't want a big wedding. She only wanted to stand beside the man she loved and speak vows in front of the people who mattered most. And Tristan was willing to give her anything she wanted. The garden was decorated with white flowers everywhere, the kind Meredith had loved, and that had been Bryn's idea. She wanted the woman who had once loved Tristan to be present in some way, wanted her to know Bryn hadn't come to replace her but to carry forward the story she had begun. Tristan didn't say a word when he saw the white flowers, but his eyes went wet for a second, and he squeezed Bryn's hand a little tighter. The 3 girls were bridesmaids, wearing identical pink dresses, their hair braided perfectly by a professional stylist, because Tristan flatly refused to let anyone see his clumsy handiwork on a day this important. They stood beside their mother through the whole ceremony, eyes shining, smiling so hard they could barely stay still. Connor officiated, and he opened with a grin so wide it nearly split his face. "I never thought I'd stand here and do this," he said, looking at Tristan with the teasing affection of a younger brother. "My brother, the man all of Chicago fears, standing here with red eyes because of 1 woman and 3 little girls." Tristan glared at him. "I'm not crying. Your eyes are wet," Connor pointed out, and the guests burst into laughter. When it was time for vows, Tristan held Bryn's hands, and his voice, the voice that had ordered killings, threatened enemies, made an entire city tremble, shook like a boy's. "Bryn, I vow to love you, protect you, stay with you through every storm. I vow to learn how to be a good husband, even if I'll make a lot of mistakes along the way." He paused, swallowed, and went on, his words thick. "And I vow to become the father of Ellie, Daisy, and Molly, to love them, protect them, raise them as my own, until my last breath." Bryn squeezed his hands, tears falling while her smile never faded. "Tristan, I vow to love you, the light and the dark, I vow to stand beside you no matter what the world says about you, no matter how black the past may be. And I vow I'll never be afraid when you're with me, because I know you'll always protect us." Connor nodded, then turned to the three girls. "Ellie, Daisy, Molly, come up here with your mom and dad." The three girls ran forward and stood between Tristan and Bryn, wide-eyed and waiting. Connor looked at them with mock seriousness. "This is the most important part of the ceremony. Do you accept Tristan Blackwood as your dad? Will you love him, put up with his stiff narration, and forgive him for his clumsy hairstyles?" The three girls looked at each other, then shouted together with all the strength in their small bodies. "Yes." Tristan dropped to his knees and gathered all three into his arms, and for the first time in his life he said words he'd never believed he would. "Dad loves you. No pain. No guilt about Meredith. No darkness dragging him down. Only love, pure and warm, filling his chest until it almost stole his breath." "We love you too, Dad," Ellie said, clinging to his neck. "So much," Daisy added, her face pressed into his shoulder. "The most," Molly finished, and she cried, crying from happiness, crying because for the first time in her life someone called her his child, and truly meant it. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Connor wiped his eyes and Felicity teased him. Guests reached for tissues. Even a few Mafia men on guard duty tried to hide their tears behind their sunglasses. "Now I pronounce you husband and wife," Connor said, his voice a little shaky. "And the Blackwood family officially gains 4 more members." Tristan kissed Bryn. The three girls jumped and clapped, and when the ceremony ended, Felicity asked Bryn how it felt. Bryn looked at Tristan holding Molly on one arm, his other hand clasping Ellie's and Daisy's, all 4 of them laughing, and she smiled. "Like I came home." After a very long time, this was the first wedding Tristan didn't hate, because it was his own, with the woman he loved, and 3 little girls who had saved him with one question and their small fortune. 15 years later, the Blackwood estate glowed with lights and laughter on the night of Ellie's wedding. The little girl who once asked, "Are you a bad man?" was now 21, radiant in a pure white wedding dress, dancing her first waltz with her husband. Tristan sat at the VIP table with Bryn beside him, their hands clasped the way they had been for 15 years. Asher, their 13-year-old son, was somewhere causing trouble at the reception with his friends. Daisy and Molly, now also 21, stood near the stage, arguing over who would catch the bouquet, even though both of them already had boyfriends. Tristan watched Ellie dance, and memories rushed back like a flood. That night 15 years ago at Connor's engagement party, when he sat alone with a full glass of whiskey and a heart that had been dead for a long time, the night 3 6-year-old girls walked up to his table and asked a question that changed his entire life. "What are you thinking about?" Bryn asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "About the night I met you. The night you got manipulated by 3 6-year-olds? She laughed. "The night I got saved by 3 angels." Ellie stepped off the dance floor and hurried to her parents' table, her wedding skirt flaring like a white cloud. "Dad, I want to thank you." Tristan looked at his daughter, the little girl from before, now a grown woman, and his chest ached with happiness. For what? For saying yes to 3 strange little girls that night, for not leaving when things got hard, for becoming our dad even though you didn't have to. "That was the best decision of my life," Tristan said, his voice rough. "And I'd do it 1,000,000 times again if I could." Ellie kissed his forehead, then ran off to find her husband, and Tristan watched her with the proud, aching eyes of a father who had forgotten his own darkness. Then he saw it. In the corner of the reception, a young man sat alone with an untouched drink in front of him, his gaze distant, fixed on the crowd without truly seeing anything. Lonely, out of place, as if he were present but didn't belong. Tristan recognized that look instantly, because it was the same look he'd worn for 4 years after Meredith died. And then, 3 little girls appeared. Ellie's daughters, triplets, 6 years old, with brown curls and bright eyes like their mothers long ago. They walked toward the lonely man with determined steps, their pink junior bridesmaid dresses fluttering with each stride. The little girl in front stopped in front of him, tilted her head, and asked in a clear, innocent voice, "Are you a bad man?" Tristan laughed, the sound rising warm and full in his chest. "Here we go again." Bryn laughed too, leaning closer into him. "Our family really does have a strange tradition. A tradition of saving lonely people," Tristan said. "A tradition of recognizing good men even when they look scary." Daisy and Molly walked past, watching their nieces with nostalgic faces. "They look exactly like we did back then," Molly said. "Should we step in?" Daisy asked. Ellie appeared beside them, watching her own daughters with a knowing smile. "No, let them do it themselves. We did pretty well." Tristan looked at his family, his wife beside him, his daughters grown, his granddaughters carrying on their family's strange and beautiful tradition. He remembered 15 years ago, when 3 little girls asked if he was a bad man, and he didn't know the answer. Now he did. He wasn't a good man. He wasn't a bad man. He was simply a man who had been loved enough to become the best version of himself. Some people are born good. Some people learn how to become good. And Tristan Blackwood, he learned what good was from 3 6-year-old girls and 1 unbreakable woman, through $5.37 and a promise. And it was the most valuable lesson of his life. This story teaches us that nobody is born perfect, and it's never too late to change. Sometimes the ones who save us aren't grand heroes, but small souls with pure hearts, people who can see light inside the darkness we can't even find in ourselves. Love doesn't come from perfection. It comes from acceptance, from loving someone with all their scars and shadows. And family isn't always blood. It's the people who choose to stay, choose to love, choose not to give up, no matter how hard it gets. If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss more moving stories every day. Your like and share are a huge encouragement that helps us keep bringing you meaningful content. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever met someone who changed your life in an unexpected way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories from deep in your hearts. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days ahead. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.